Scripture Explorers is brought to you by a dedicated team who work for many hours each week to bring these stories to life. Please support us on Patreon, or make a one-time donation at scriptureexplorers.com to allow us to continue to make this resource available for families.
Hi, welcome back to Scripture Explorers. I'm James.
And I'm Aria. And we're the Scripture Explorers.
Hey Mormon, did Moroni win the war against Amoron?
The war was long and complicated. When the Nephites were being righteous, they were successful in taking back cities. When they were wicked, they lost cities. The Nephites had a lot of prisoners to deal with from the war. The Lamanites also had a lot of prisoners. The Lamanites had taken a lot of women and children as prisoners, while the Nephites had only taken soldiers as prisoners. Moroni tried to make a deal with Amoron for a fair release of prisoners. Amoron said he would exchange prisoners so he could kill more Nephites. This made Moroni so mad. So Moroni snuck into the city at night and gave weapons to the prisoners, so that when the Lamanites woke up in the morning, all their prisoners were armed, and Moroni was around the city with his army. The Lamanites gave up and became prisoners. But in other places the war was not going well. Do you remember Helaman?
Yeah, he was Alma's son.
That's right. Well, Alma had left Helaman in charge of the church, but he was also needed for the war. Helaman wrote a letter to tell Moroni about how the war was going for him. Do you remember the people of Ammon?
Yeah, they buried their weapons.
They did, and they promised God they would never kill again. But they were watching the Nephites fight the Lamanites, and they wanted to help. They were going to take their swords up again and join the war, but Helaman wouldn't let them. They had made a promise, and he wanted them to keep it. But there were 2,000 of their sons who had not made that promise. They wanted to fight so their fathers wouldn't have to. They were brave and faithful. They are called the Stripling warriors, and Helaman called them his sons. Helaman led them to help a captain named Antipas. Antipas and his men were sad and having a hard time in the war. When Helaman brought his soldiers to them, it helped them to be brave, and it made the Lamanites run away. But Antipas and Helaman knew they needed to trick the Lamanites into fighting so they could beat them.
How did they trick them?
They sent Helaman and his army of 2,000 out of the city to look like they were taking food and weapons to another Nephite city. The Lamanites chased them, and the army of Antipas chased the Lamanites. Suddenly the Lamanites were not chasing Helaman anymore, and he realized they must be attacking Antipas. He asked the Stripling warriors what they should do. They had never fought in a battle before, but they had faith that God would help them, so they decided to go and help Antipas. They were able to save the army of Antipas and fight with such strength that the Lamanites gave up. Helaman was worried that a lot of his 2,000 Stripling warriors had been killed, but none of them had been. God had saved every one of them.
Wow, that's so cool.
After this, the Nephite armies were able to take back 2 of their cities from the Lamanites by tricking them. They took the 2 cities without any fighting and just took the Lamanites as prisoners. Next, the Nephites wanted to retake a city named Manti. They were camped outside the city when they saw that the Lamanites were preparing to come fight them. Helaman had some of his men hide in the wilderness. When the Lamanites came out to attack, Helaman and his soldiers ran away, leading the Lamanites away from the city. After the Lamanites had passed by the soldiers that were hiding in the wilderness, those soldiers went back to the city. There were only a few guards there, so it was easy. That night, the Lamanites chasing Helaman set up camp, assuming that Helaman would too. But he kept on marching his army right back to the city of Manti. So when the Lamanites got back to the city, it had been taken by the Nephites.
That was a good trick.
But now things got tough. Helaman had taken a lot of cities back from the Lamanites, but he didn't have a big enough army or enough supplies to take care of the cities. He knew he would start to lose the cities again if he didn't get help. That was why he wrote the letter to Moroni to ask for help. Moroni got angry and wrote some very mean things to the chief judge, Pahoran, because he thought Pahoran was not sending the armies and supplies. He told Pahoran that he would come and attack him if he didn't help, but Pahoran was a good man. He was kind in responding to Moroni and let him know that he wanted to help, but the kingmen had come and he had to run away from Zarahemla, so he couldn't help. Moroni took an army and marched to Zarahemla to help Pahoran take back Zarahemla from the kingmen. Then he and Pahoran sent armies and supplies to Helaman.
Did they win the war then?
One of the last important things they had to do was take back a city called Nephihah. The Lamanites were keeping many prisoners there. The city was a big fortress that Moroni knew would be very hard to take in a battle. So Moroni came up with a way to get the city back without having to have a battle.
What did he do?
In the night, Moroni and his soldiers used ladders and ropes to climb up the city walls. Then they gave weapons to the prisoners. When the Lamanites woke up, They saw that their prisoners were all armed and that the army of Moroni was outside the city. They ran away, and the Nephites took control of the city. After this, there were still more battles that happened, but the war was nearly over. Ammoron came to battle with the Nephites in a city close to where Teancum was with his army. Well, you can probably guess what Teancum did when it got dark.
Did he kill Ammoron?
Yes, just like he did to Amalickiah. But Ammoron called out to his guards, and they killed Teancum before he could escape.
That's sad.
It was very sad, but after Ammoron's death, Moroni was able to drive the Lamanites out of the Nephite lands, and the Nephites began to prosper again. Helaman began to preach again, and while there were still battles between the Nephites and the Lamanites sometimes, the Nephites had won the long war. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Also download our free coloring pages at the link below. And if you've enjoyed Scripture Explorers, consider supporting us on Patreon, also at the links below. We'll see you next week.